In this episode, we interviewed Dan Corless about his experience going through multiple consulting firms, starting with Deloitte and ending most recently as a principal at Oliver Wyman. We hear about his career challenges, mistakes, and opportunities that he both took advantage of. And finally, we hear about some personal fun things about his life and career. So our interaction with Dan began, I actually am hesitant to say the number of years because I think it was 5 years ago, but it may have been
more than that,
even
6
longer.
or 7 at this
Okay.
point. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So we worked with Dan as he was beginning to take a look at consulting as an experienced hire moving in. And we're super excited to hear about his background. It was incredibly relevant for consulting. We felt like he had a great shot. I actually had the chance to work with him directly, which was really fun and a very humbling experience because Dan, as you will hear, is kind of an all-star and has been throughout his career. But his move into consulting was also really compelling. So we worked not just on cases, but also on building his story, and then have remained friends and colleagues as Dan has come to speak really actively at our different seminars that we hold in New York City. He's joined us on calls. So Dan, welcome back. We're really glad to have you, and thank you for staying in touch over the years. We really enjoy our relationship with you.
Oh, no problem at all.
My first question in my pre-planned questions here is just tell me what you wanted to be when you grew up professionally. So as early as you knew that, in a way that it was semi-relevant to what you began with, it would just be helpful to have a little personal context about the beginning of your career.
Right. I mean, when we think about consulting, there was this kind of a non-direct path. I mean, a lot of folks, they go in undergrad and they come out, go into consulting, they just know, or they come out of B school and it's just an obvious thing for them, or whatever their career path may be. For me, it wasn't so direct, but even early on, pre-business school, I was a sales rep for a very large company, and it's kind of a Walmart for the biotech industry. Just sold lots of stuff they use for research and development purposes, and consumables, equipment, and whatnot. And it was just a giant catalog of stuff, and I had a very large account that we had a locked-in agreement with, and I had to find ways to grow the business, and just going door to door wasn't going to work. So I was reading the Harvard Business Review, and I was reading about strategies that Procter and Gamble used at Walmart, or somebody did at Target, or some giant corporation did somewhere to enter a market, and I started sketching it out on paper, like maybe I could do that here, so things like that were early for me to kind of think about how can I strategically attack a problem and pull it apart into its elements, et cetera. And that led me to business school. Then business school led me to GE, and I was at GE a long time. But my first kind of interest in consulting at GE was I was in a leadership program. So it was 4 6-month rotations, very consulting, where you parachute into a business and you have to solve a problem in 6 months. So you by yourself basically, and you're given a 1-pager. And you have to figure out something complex, boil it down. You need to learn the people, the process, the technology, and get a solution done, and then get the people to buy in on your solution and kind of start the ball rolling on implementation. So I did that for 2 years, just 4 of these rotations, and I really enjoyed that. And then in my roles at GE, I was a business builder. I would restructure businesses. I'd kind of go into the burning building and fix it. So again, it was okay, figure out what's wrong, kind of build out the frameworks, build out the solution plan, and start rolling it out. Some of the things you might do in consulting, but the pivotal moment for me was one of my last roles at GE. And by then I'd worked my way up to director. My boss was the executive general manager. My boss's boss was the CEO, by a guy named Kieran Murphy, who now runs all of GE Healthcare. And they wanted me to solve a very large strategic problem for $1 billion business. And I was being mentored by my boss, who was ex-McKinsey. And I would go to him and we'd be hashing things out. And he'd say, when I was at McKinsey, this is how we would think through this problem. He'd draw out a nice framework, or, it's a cliche, but just kind of a way of thinking about a problem. And I said, wow, this is really cool. I'd really like to learn more about this. And I realized that I'd been solving problems strategically, but I'd also been kind of brute forcing things, and, hitting things with a sledgehammer, and maybe not the greatest data analysis, et cetera, because I didn't really understand, how to do it yet. So I said, where can I learn more about this, and where can I attack more problems and with this rapid fire kind of turnover of projects, et cetera. And consulting was something that, seemed important to me. So throughout my career, there was like elements of consulting or me being drawn to a consulting type solution for a real problem. But it was really that last but like last role at GE where my boss was, this ex-consulting guy from an elite consulting, went to Wharton, went to McKinsey, and here he was as a senior leader at GE. And he's like walking me through stuff on his whiteboard and how to set things up, and frame things, and even setting up the final deck. This is how we would lay it out, et cetera. Socializing it, just all these things that, I probably wouldn't have known. And that's what kind of made me think about moving into consulting as a career choice, or at least a part of my career to add tools into the toolbox of who I am as a professional.
Amazing. So, question for you. I know a little bit about your background. So, as a spoiler, I know where you went. But when you were surveying the landscape of firms, the first place that you joined was Deloitte. How did you decide that Deloitte would be a good fit and a good place to go after GE?
Yeah, it's a great question I get a lot. And I was, there's boutique consulting firms that may focus on niche areas, or there may be very focused firms that do like one thing, like economics research or something like that. But I was at a big like conglomerate type company, and I kind of was drawn to the big conglomerate like consulting model. Like I like the idea of like these solving like really big problems, and the idea of like navigating a large organization wasn't daunting to me. Going to the world's largest professional service organization, trying to figure it out, seemed totally fine. Global clients, global projects. I worked on a lot of cross-border projects. So that to me just seemed totally normal, given I used to run global businesses and I had people working for me around the world at GE. So this is fine. So Deloitte seemed like a really great place. And the nature of the work that they're doing at the time, and still do to a certain degree, is kind of strategic implementation. So they do a lot of strategy, and they do a lot of strategic implementation, kind of that middle ground between like pure implementation, pure strategy. And they do pure strategy and they do pure implementation. But a lot of the work in strategy and operations, which is the service area that I joined at Deloitte within Deloitte Consulting, was really focused on how do we refine the strategy and then make it real. So like really like rolling out that strategy. Kind of like, I'd call it 20,000 feet, not 30,000, 40,000 feet, and not like hitting the ground, but that kind of middle ground. So there's a lot of meat on the bone. So the engagements were maybe not like your typical short 4 to 6 week pure strategy, and they weren't necessarily 6, 9, 12 month like implementations. They were usually like 8 to 12 weeks. So 2 to 3 months. So they're kind of that middle ground between pure strategy and pure implementation, where you're doing a little bit of both, and you're getting involved with some operating elements, but some strategic elements. So that was really what was interesting to me. And they have a big life science practice as well. So I joined Monitor Deloitte. So Monitor used to be a standalone firm, was acquired by Deloitte. You're seeing that with like Booz Allen being acquired by PwC to create Strategy, and Parthenon being acquired by EY. So they have EY Parthenon. So they have these like pure play strategy houses within their larger consulting organizations, and it gives them kind of a broader range of services. So that's where I was and where I landed, why I selected Deloitte.
Now, I'm going to linger on Deloitte just a little bit because it was your first place that you landed. So it was the freshest consulting experience that you had. Can you just talk a little bit about your application process and your interview process to get into Deloitte, and how easy you felt that was compared to what you needed to do to get into GE, and kind of how your experience had been in a large conglomerate?
Yeah, I mean, so GE was like, they came to campus. So I actually did the campus recruiting route with GE. They came to campus. I had a very specific background for GE. GE required 5 years of commercial experience, either consulting or some kind of sales and marketing kind of commercial background. So 5 years, which most B school students don't have. A lot of B school students have 3, maybe 4 years experience. So you wouldn't even be considered unless you had 5. So I had 5.25 years or something like that. But so you needed to have experience and progression in the career. So you had maybe a sales rep and then a senior sales rep or consultant, senior consultant, et cetera. And you needed to be at one of their target schools. So there was like a pretty high bar just to like start the conversation. And they only recruited at like 15 or so schools. So that was another area there. And then it was a lot of fit interviews, and then which for some people is easy and some people it's hard. It depends on your background. And then I remember there was like a super day. It was like after several rounds of in-person and phone, and there was a on-campus dinner, and you were being watched during the dinner, right? So like, it wasn't just let's go have fun. It was like they wanted to see how you behaved with each other. What kind of questions did you ask? Were you polite? Did you like hold the door open for somebody? You know, like, are you someone who thinks about others or just thinking about yourself? So that like a lot of people didn't realize that they're being interviewed at the dinner by just being observed. That kind of creeps people up. I actually think it's really good to see how people behave when they're not sitting across an interview table. So that was one piece of it. And the final piece was like a super day where you were brought to Crotonville, which, you know, people on this call can Google it. It is a legendary corporate training center outside New York City. This is like where I found like Jack Welch, and this is like kind of the hallowed halls of GE leadership. Every senior leader has passed through here. They had a final round interviews there. So we did our interviews there, and again, more fit interviews. And then we had to do a presentation, and we had, I forget what the time was on the presentation, but it was timed. It was like 10 minutes. You had 10 minutes to present something, Q&A. And if you weren't done, they would literally like pull you off the stage, if you will. And obviously you failed if you didn't finish your presentation. So I prepared something relevant, practice. And I gave my pitch. And coming from sales, that was not hard for me. But there was a lot of people who really struggled. They either bit off something that was way too complex to discuss in 10 minutes, or they weren't clear and concise, so they couldn't convey or be persuasive and all this stuff. And it was a pretty rough day for a lot of people. And went through that. And again, that also finished with a dinner and cocktail hour and everything. And again, you were sitting with executives and they all were taking notes after the fact. You didn't really know this taking notes observation until afterwards. But that was all part of the process. So in one way, it was very difficult. In one way, it was easy. Whereas consulting interviews are very much about the case. It's very analytical. It's very structured. It's, you know, you crush the case, you don't. And the fit piece is important, but less so than, say, like the corporate gigs. So that was the GE process.
And then, yeah, can you juxtapose what you did at Deloitte to what happened at GE? And again, you were an experienced hire, so it wouldn't have necessarily been exactly the same. So
right.
if there was anything in particular about that.
So Deloitte and all the consulting firms I interviewed with, I networked my way in. So I found someone either in my network or someone I was very close with that could make an introduction. You know, sometimes it was like, you know, we'd have an email and a phone call, and then I'd meet someone for coffee, and then they'd say, okay, I feel comfortable introducing this person to recruiting. And then, you know, hey, I heard we're hiring. Let me connect the dots right now. And, you know, there was usually some work on my part to build the network in. And then, so networking your way in is very much the way to get into most of these consulting firms. Now that there's the internet, there's recruiters and stuff like that, but really the best way to do is to like find someone in your network and network your way in to whichever consulting firm that you can. And then when I was networked in to Deloitte, it was an ex-GE colleague. We had worked together in a part of GE. He was pre-MBA. He went through a very elite undergrad finance program, and then he left after the program was over, went to Deloitte, and was doing well. So when he introduced me, it carried some weight because he was already pretty well respected before B school. And then I networked my way in and I interviewed and things like that, and very informational interviews. And then they put me into the process, and the experience hire process it's a little more fit based. I still had a case interview, but I had one, not like 6 or 7. And there was a lot of fit. And then I did a case interview. My case interview lasted 20 minutes. The guy was going through the case. I was, you know, knocking out here's my framework and here's the structure and here's how I'd set up this thing, whatever. And then the guy was just like, you know what, I've heard enough. So tell me more about your background. You know, he put away the laminated cards, and I was like, okay, I guess that's a good thing, because it was he'd heard enough that he felt I could think my way through things. And then, you know, I've got a phone call a few days later saying, hey, we'd like to offer you a job. Deloitte, it was funny though, with the Deloitte experience hires, an off-cycle type of thing. It was right before I interviewed, it was like end of year, so they had to like pause, and then I had to follow up with them, and there was a little back and forth, and then over, of course, extra couple months for them to get an actual offer, get it signed, done, and join Deloitte. But you can see the juxtaposition is that instead of like a very traditional kind of formulaic campus hiring, there's the campus presentation, you do some networking, you go to a coffee chat, you do a resume drop, you get the phone screen, you do this, do this, and it's very kind of structured. The experience hire out is very unstructured. It's very candidate driven. It's not them coming to you. You have to go to them. You have to follow up. You have to stay on top of recruiting. Recruiting says, oh, I'll email you in a week. You have to follow up with them in a week. They probably will be busy. So it's very expected that you will be networking your way in. You're not bothering them. You're not a trouble. You're expecting that. And if you do that, they actually like that. They like the fact that you're tenacious, you're following up, you're diligent, you're concise, et cetera, et cetera. So very different processes. But the way I got in wasn't, my father was on the board of some, company and was a client and they're doing me a favor. It's definitely much my own generation. I generated that myself. So that's how I got into Deloitte.
We'll be right back after this quick break.
Have you ever heard a new digital trend and thought to yourself, okay, does this really matter? Asking the right questions helps you cut through the noise and get down to what matters most. I'm Jim Hertzfeld, host of the What If, So What podcast, where we discover what's possible with digital and figure out how to make it real by asking what if, so what, and most importantly, now what? Subscribe and listen, and together we can turn big ideas into tangible actions so you can get shit done.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I have one more Deloitte question, and then we're going to take some questions from the listeners, and then we'll dive back into the next stage in your career. But my final question about Deloitte is, what was one key skill that you were glad you already had when you joined Deloitte? You mentioned it was a large organization. There was a lot to navigate. So what's one key skill that helped you do that and helped you do well there? And what is one that you wish you would have been better at when you joined Deloitte?
So I say the first thing one thing that really helped me was that you have to there's a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of moving parts with everything you do. So if you want to get one thing done, there may be 5 or 6 people that have to weigh in. So you have to be able to quickly identify your stakeholder map and how they influence the decision. That's one thing that I had. Another thing was, really understanding that, not only a stakeholder map, but what are the pieces and parts? There's a lot of noise. At GE, there's a lot of noise, and you had to be able to get rid of the noise and get down to those couple of things. And when you're in such a large global organization, there's a lot of things that influence what you're doing. So, for example, I almost missed my number one quarter because of the Russian incursion into Crimea. I don't know if you remember that from 5-6 years ago. And then there was U.S. government sanctions, I think, against Russia. So we had product and services basically sitting on a loading dock somewhere in Europe that weren't moving until things got kind of sorted. So I was sitting in front of finance leaders saying I might miss my quarter, and I said, "What's going on? Last month everything was great." Well, you're basically telling a dog ate your homework kind of story, but it's global. Politics and global conflicts and, these things weigh on your mind. Or when the Fukushima, the earthquakes happened there and the nuclear power plant erupted, GE had a factory there. So, and we have people there. So you have to make sure your people are okay. You want to make sure everyone's taken care of, the families are all right. And these are things you have to deal with. So when I went to Deloitte, I already went in knowing that it isn't just this point solution between me and this person I'm sitting across. There may be others involved, there may be other processes at work. So that was helpful when I was doing, say, a cross-border merger and acquisition deal where there's a lot of people, a lot of moving parts, a lot of opinions, a lot of people that need to be influenced, a lot of people that need to be massaged, and it's going to be touchy with this person, and that person's a yes and this person's no. So that was very helpful. The things that I wish I had, which is why I went to consulting, was that kind of rigor of analyses, the depth of how you kind of quickly analyze and structure and work through problems, slide building. My slides got really good.
Yes.
My spreadsheets and my slides, even after a year of consulting were way better. And even now I think back of maybe struggling early on in consulting and being that was so easy. How was I having a hard time with that stuff compared to the challenges I deal with now? And So I think those are some of the things the things that I struggled with, wish I had more, was the reason why I went there in the first place. So, a lot of that, classic things that you learn in consulting, why I went there. And I said, yep, I'm missing this stuff. So this is great. Getting my butt kicked, but learning a ton.
Exactly. Well, Dan, we have a really good question about your Deloitte time specifically, and some of the questions we might save until a little bit later when we're talking about the recruiting environment right now. But this one is around moving from commercial experience, 5 years or so, into a consulting environment. Because consulting firms often look for something that's relevant. You had healthcare,
Right.
but some other people have different things like IT, project management, or even entrepreneurial experience. So from the other side, when you were sitting in the recruiting side at Deloitte, what were some ways that people made their prior experiences compelling for you? If somebody's thinking about either taking what they already have or pursuing their next job as a stepping stone to consulting, what would you recommend?
So when I say, I'm talking about I was focus on an experienced hire. Most firms don't hire a lot of experienced hires that don't have consulting already. So that's the bad news. The good news is there aren't a lot of people who are, say, in some form of industry, will say they're like me and want to go into consulting. So there aren't as many. And a lot of firms are looking to, say, bolster some of that, right? They have their pipeline of people coming out of college, coming out of B school, and they need like subject matter experts, or they need people with deep domain expertise. And I think a lot of firms are also trying to get a little more specialized in certain areas, whether it could be in healthcare or life science or certain financial service industries or something like that. So, the specialization is becoming more important, even at big firms, to be able to not just be a jack of all trades, but also be able to be really good at a few things that clients really need. So that's the good news. And I think that when looking at it, it had to be something. Well, the thing is, I would recruit just for kind of the areas that I was looking at. So for me, I would want to be looking for very specific sets of experiences or specific companies, types of experience. And I think so. So, for example, if I have an IT background, I would, you would look at a company like that has a big IT practice, like Accenture, huge in that area. Even Deloitte has some of this stuff as well, or Tata, or one of these companies that does a lot of Cognizant, these kind of big IT consulting companies. I would first look for the companies that do these sorts of things. So if I see a resume, if I was at Deloitte in life science M&A, and someone sends me, oh, here's a friend of mine looking to get into consulting, and it's like IT project management. Well, that's not what I do, and I'm not even sure where in our organization we do that. I would, if the person had great set of experience, like let's say they had relevant experience in, say, project management, client delivery, client management, things that like are tangential or overlap with what we do, I could say, okay, this person's, they've worked their way up, they've done some of the things that we do. So I would, maybe forward on to recruiting, say, I don't know where this goes, but maybe we can take a look at this person. Someone take a look at this that knows more than I do. So really, from anyone that's looking to get in, the most important thing is to identify the firms. So the whole thing I said is you have to network your way in. So identify the firms that do the things that have overlap with your background. So there are firms that just do project management, and they kind of will project manage anything, and that's your thing. You have a PMP designation. There could be opportunities there. IT is obviously a huge space. It's always big. There's always a lot of work in IT. If you have healthcare experience, but very specific healthcare experience, there are firms that just do that work with insurance companies. There are firms that work with just payer providers like hospitals. And I'm speaking from my experience with people that do regulatory work with like the FDA or government consulting. There's all kinds of niches. And I would say look for the firms that focus on the niche or the industry that you're strong in, and make sure that you have experience like project management, client management, strategic problem solving. Whoa, here was a problem. I was on a team. We had a project. problem, and we were tasked with solving it, and here's what we did, and I led this part of it, or what have you. Something that sounds like a consulting project. So those are the things I would suggest. If you have it, great. If you don't have it, this stuff exists in every company. You find stuff like side projects and things that people are working on. Look around. Ask your boss, ask your boss's boss, what kind of side project you can work on. It might just be an extra hour a day, but those kind of extra projects could give you the experience set that make you more compelling to move into consulting, because they're going to want to see something in you that says that you're already kind of doing stuff that we do, and you can make the transition. So I think that's important.
Well, Dan, speaking of niche firms that are more focused on specific things, I want to talk now about your transition out of Deloitte. The next place that you went was to Quintiles IMS, which does have a very specific focus. Can you explain why you went there and what your favorite thing was about working there?
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things about Quintiles IMS is they just do pharmaceutical forecasting consulting work. So helping big pharmaceutical companies figure out where to place their bets. So should I invest in this drug area, this type of therapy, invest in this company? And they need to kind of forecast the revenues into the future. So if we pay X amount of dollars, what kind of a return will we get? And over how long? How competitive is the space? All that kind of good stuff. And IMS Consulting, which I joined, had just merged with a company called Quintiles, which is a contract research organization, which also did some consulting as well. IMS Consulting was part of IMS Health, and IMS Health was a big aggregator of data. They were probably one of the earlier big data companies, and they would aggregate all kinds of pharmaceutical sales data, volume, sales numbers, at very granular levels that a pharmaceutical company can slice and dice and analyze. Even sales rep activity and territory density, all this kind of stuff that they held. And as a consulting arm, we had access to this huge mine of data. And we would pull on that data and analyze it and provide answers to our clients. I got a lot of great M&A experience at Deloitte. And I wanted to get more into how do pharmaceutical companies think through placing bets and making decisions on where to invest and why and whatnot. And basically, that's all IMS Consulting was doing at the time. They've moved into some other stuff now, but basically, I was just doing project after project after project like this. Whereas if you were at a big consulting firm, you would be doing pharma projects, you're doing med device projects, you're doing all this other stuff. And at that point, I wanted to just learn about this, and I just got one rep after the other. Whether it may be an M&A work, it could be a investment decision, whether to say yes or no. It could be product launch. So we help the company think through the final phase of clinical trials as well as launching the product, and what kind of return they're going to get in their investment. So all kinds of projects around that. A lot of M&A deals as well. Yes, so that was a great experience, because by the end of that year, I had a much deeper understanding that I had before joining, but also a deeper understanding than if I spent several years at another firm, just because of the velocity and density of the amount of reps I was getting. It was all in one area. So it was a great experience for me.
So Dan, great. So another transition after that, after you had that velocity of reps, was that you moved over to LEK. And so similar question, what about LEK? Did they do really well? What was compelling to move over?
Yeah, no, LEK reached out to me. They said, hey, you're at IMS, and, we'd really like to expand our capabilities to understanding big data and data analysis. And you obviously understand IMS data. And I said, yep. And they said, we also do a lot of M&A work, and we've got a lot of M&A work coming in, and you obviously understand that. So would you like to do some of that? Said, of course. So that'd be great. So I went in, joined them, and they're very well known in life science as well. Like, they're very well respected. They're very well known in early clinical R&D type supporting consulting, understanding what to do with your early development products, as well as stuff that's in the early parts of the FDA clinical trials. They're very good at that. They're also very good at rare disease. LEK really understands these like small oddball diseases that a lot of people are investing in. And it just takes a special toolkit really to think through these problems. So they're just excellent at some of these things. And they also did medical devices. They did equipment and diagnostics. They did all kinds of services and contract manufacturing, all kinds of something. I said, wow, so I could take this to a bigger platform. Also, the other piece to that was that as an engagement manager at LEK, you did more than an engagement manager at other firms. You were really taking on what we consider maybe more of a senior manager type role. So most managers managed one project, one set of team doing their work streams. At LEK, you managed two projects, and underneath that was a post-MBA consultant that ran the team day to day. So you were getting much more senior level experience, and you got more involved in the selling process. So it was actually a great opportunity to kind of, even though my title didn't change, I actually was taking almost more of an elevated role. So it was exciting to be able to just do tons and tons of M&A work and get more exposure to leading multiple projects at the same time.
Well, speaking of more senior roles and partner, I want to spend about 5 minutes talking about your time at Oliver Wyman. And then we're going to open up to more of the career-oriented questions, which I know a lot of people have. And there are questions ranging from, how is COVID affecting what you perceive as the current recruiting environment to very specific, like, what about me? What can I do in this particular situation? So we'll cover as many of those as we can. But I do think that it's really interesting that the most recent stop on your tour de consulting was at Oliver Wyman. And I would just love to hear a little bit about specifically, the type of work that you were selling, how it was different in the way that you use data and problem solved compared to the other firms that you had worked with.
No, it's great. So I'll start with kind of the LEK data analysis. So we'll actually go back to IMS. It was their own proprietary. They were the data. Like, people would buy the data. Other consulting firms, pharma companies would buy IMS data. It's kind of the industry standard to understanding everything. So people would buy memberships to the data, or they would buy cuts of data from IMS. So that was my first set of data analytics, and they had their own proprietary analysis tools to analyze data. So it was actually quite interesting to be like the owner and manipulator of the data at LEK.
Quite convenient in some ways, right, Dan?
Yeah, I know. It's kind of like not a monopoly, but it's kind of like, it's like you've got the water in the middle of the desert. It's like, come to me. But at LEK, which was interesting there was that they were really thinking forward about data analytics being an important part of the future of consulting. So classically, the best place to be was like corporate business unit strategy, 4 to 6 week projects, sitting at the right hand of the chief strategy officer in the C-suite. Everyone wanted to be there, and there's a few firms that did it, and everyone else was like knocking at the door. But the reality is today, it's more about like total value that you can bring to clients. So it's, some of these pure strategy firms are doing implementation work, they're doing pricing work, they're doing supply chain work, they're doing all kinds of stuff, and informing that through different types of tools. So you're seeing digital practices, you're seeing more implementation work and operations and consulting groups within strategy firms. You're seeing all this stuff. LEK doesn't have the scale really to do like big implementation projects. That wasn't their interest anyway. But what they did see was an opportunity around analytics. So while I was there, everybody went through training to use Alteryx, which is a data crunching platform. So there's a whole bunch of them out there, but Alteryx is one of them, where you can, instead of trying to hand build like really crazy spreadsheets, this is a platform that helped you bring lots of disparate data together, and helped you pull it together, organize it, and then start analyzing it. And I may not be doing fully justice to Alteryx. I got the engagement manager level training, which is very sparse, but it's a powerful tool. And the point there is that your clients are cranking out more and more data. Everybody's collecting so much more data than 10 years ago. So, or even 5, 10, 15 years ago. They want to analyze, but it's coming from different systems. So you have to find ways to pull it all together and analyze it. So they chose to invest in Alteryx and then Tableau, which is a data visualization tool. So you would, pull all this data in, crunch it in Alteryx, visualize it through Tableau, and then you'd create output that you could give to your client. And the magic in it was just what data to analyze, how to analyze it, what's that analytic work plan, which is something I would help devise and my team would implement. They would do all the programming and the crunching, all that stuff. But then it was like, okay, how would we want to visualize it in a way that's compelling? So that would be another piece where I'd say, what I'm thinking as an output would be this or that. And the team would kind of start running through it and we'd iterate. We had a client who's had a market entry plan that wasn't, we didn't think was the right market entry plan, and they had all this data to support it. And we did our whole data crunching and visualization thing. I won't spare you all the details. We spent like a week or two doing all this, just this, our whole team working on it. And what we developed was a map of the United States. Here are the markets you're in, and then a county by county heat map of basically red, yellow, green. Like, here's where you are, here's where you're not, here's where the opportunities are, and just highlighted that, just focus here, here, and here, and you could double your business. Basically, there's something, I'm just paraphrasing, but it was a powerful one pager that showed the C-suite, investors, anyone to say, oh, here's where they are, here's the opportunity where they are. They're barely scratching the surface. They don't need to, go into different countries and different markets. They could just stay where they are and ramp up considerably. So this is how we were thinking about differentiating ourselves, was really through this data analytics, visualization of the data to provide insights that helped drive and generate decisions or support recommendations that we were making. So that's the difference right between those two firms. And then at OW, they had they do a lot of work with, OW does a lot of work with airlines and banks. And that's not my area at all, but as you know, airlines generate a lot of data, banks generate a lot of data, and
definitely
they want to analyze as well. And a lot of it's consumer facing data, sometimes it's operational data. So you had people programming, consultants, just generalist consultants programming in C, programming very complex Excel models, whether, all these different, programming SQL, et cetera, and generating these very complex models that would provide output that would generate insight. And this wasn't like an analytics group. This is just how we were on projects. So what I'm driving at here is that data is becoming very important to be able to manipulate, analyze it in a very sophisticated manner. Used to be able to just crunch a few numbers and put some stack bar charts up there, and it'd be great, maybe 15 years ago before my time. But now your clients are ex-consultants, and they have very detailed asks, and they really wanted to follow the trail of how you get to where you got to it. And it has to obviously tick and tie, and being very sharp with data analytics is kind of where things are going. So very different approach to data analysis at different firms. My group, we're private equity due diligence, and we do a lot of consumer work, do a lot of TMT work. And the work that our group does, we do a lot of consumer quant surveys. So there's a lot of work that group does in consumer focused B2C surveys, B2B, B2C type surveys. So you're doing like net promoter score and value stream mapping and things like that. So that's where you're building very detailed quantitative consumer surveys. So that's a whole magic in itself on how do you structure a survey so it follows the right data paths. How do you crunch the numbers and data and visualize it as well? So the kind of point here is that, 3 different firms, several different approaches to data analysis, but the kind of theme running through that is that data analysis is incredibly, incredibly important today. And everyone's trying to differentiate by being able to show this in their own special way. So that's very important.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, I know that people have some very specific questions about recruiting and performance at consulting firms. And I know that you were involved in both of those at many of the firms that you were in. Yep. I'm going to start with some of the performance ones. One of the questions was, what are some traits you see from those who promote quickly inside an organization? And if you want to refer to Oliver Wyman, your most recent experience as the key baseline for that, that's great. Or you can draw on other experience too.
Yeah, I mean, as far as who kind of really stands out, being a top performer, and what
yes. And Dan, just in light of your last question around data, I think one of the questions right now that people are asking is how should we be upskilling? How should we use a little bit of the time that we have right now? And if our summer is disrupted in all the ways that it could potentially be, how do we spend our time right now focusing on skills that actually matter? So if I were to paraphrase it, is it data? Is it soft skills? Is it some combination? What is it specifically that you would use to focus this time to build the skills that make that difference for people?
Yeah. I mean, how would you spell? I mean, this is just my point of view, so don't go too crazy with this. But I would say learning some data analytics, where it's some programming, being able to program something is great. You don't have to be a master programmer, but understanding the basics of SQL, and how that's used in data, because SQL is used at like a ton of places, but how is that used in data analysis? There's different C, and I think C#, I forget which flavor of C is being used in programming analytics, Python, R. There's all kinds of tools, and then there's obviously Alteryx and other platforms like that. And then Tableau, obviously, there's different data visualization tools. You don't have to know all of them, but I would understand that data analysis is like massively important. It won't be in a consulting interview. The consulting interviews are like just cases, but telling someone like, took some online courses and how to program C for building into an Excel model, or doing data analysis, and I studied Python, and I don't know, I'm just making stuff. I got a certificate in how to use Alteryx. That can't hurt, because it shows you're thinking about the kind of work that they're doing and getting more into. Be able to crush case interview, obviously that's like the most important thing. But like, if you can also show that like, hey, I've talked to your friends in consulting as well. This is like huge. You have someone who can like crunch data like that and build a good model that doesn't blow up at 2 a.m. the day before it's due, all that stuff. Knowing how to build models, Excel models first. If you're not good at building Excel models, figure out how to build Excel models. And then that next layer, I mentioned all those languages, the different data visualization tools, data crunching tools. Pick 1 or 2 and just learn about them, learn how to do some basic stuff. Because if you can show that in an interview, saying, if you're going to a non-technical consulting role and you say, hey, I learned, while we had some downtime, I learned how to program this, I learned how to build those models, and, be happy to walk you through a model I built, or something like that. That just shows that you're thinking ahead and how to position yourself for that, future's place.
Now, Dana, somebody had a really interesting question just about you and your future. Now that you have this experience in consulting, do you foresee yourself going back to a large organization like GE at a senior level, or doing something else as your next step?
My next step, it's an interesting one. I don't know that I'd want to go into a very large place like the GE, but I wouldn't say no to things. I can really think about, I have to be coy because I'm working on a couple things right now.
Fair. You don't have to disclose anything, but just tell us where your mindset is in terms of what you would and wouldn't do, or, sometimes too much, Dan. So we're interested
so I'm looking at a very senior consulting role, helping lead a practice area at a fairly well-known consulting firm. I'm just going to be vague there. And also looking at a very interesting role in industry. So just to give you an idea of what I'm looking at, just to kind of leave those there.
Well, great.
There's definitely things that I'm pursuing as opportunities.
Let me ask another question related to that, because I'm sure it may affect what you're thinking about doing now. From a macro economy perspective, you can see a lot of things in the consulting world. What do you expect to see in recruiting in the consulting realm and sales, project sales in the consulting realm in the next 6 to 12 months versus some of the problems that you think industry will be solving in that same period of time?
Yeah, I mean, there's areas like healthcare and life science and other types of things that are just booming right now. From a sales, project sales perspective, there's certain industries that are doing really well. There are areas where, I don't know anyone in, like, say, aviation or travel and leisure consulting, but I can imagine that's a terrible place to be right now. However, there are probably firms that have a good reputation for crisis management in their respective industries. They're probably busy, so they probably canceled all their projects or they put some on hold. But they're probably saying, okay, we need to figure out how to get through this, and then how do we, build, is going to be a big thing. But to be honest, a lot of companies are saying, like, we don't know what the next 3 to 6 months going to be like, but we didn't have the economy didn't crater because we built the economy's growth on a house of cards. It's built on solid quarter over quarter earnings, profits, growth, new product introduction, successfully competing in marketplaces. It was built on good stuff. And I think the market will get back to that, but it's going to take some time. So I think some companies are saying, listen, we may freeze hiring, we may slow down a few of our projects, but we need to keep staying the course. Because the fear is that this isn't like right now, that if this isn't something that's going to be sustained for multiple years, that it's going to be a problem where if you're not ready to go, the market's going to leave you behind. Every market, every industry is hyper competitive. If you take your foot off the gas because you're afraid of some Great Depression that's coming and it doesn't happen, and your competitors, maybe took their foot off gas a tiny bit, but instead of going 100 miles an hour, they stayed at like 70, 75, and you went down to 25 miles an hour or stopped, they're going to be that much farther down the road. So the work is still happening, and I think people are going to say, okay, how do we adapt and plan for crises in the future? Maybe not a pandemic virus, but maybe there's, some weather event or something, some massive tornadoes that knock out Texas oil refineries and sends the global oil market through the ceiling. So, there could be some other kind of dislocation. How do we plan for that? How do we plan for this for the future? What's business going to look like in the future? So I think those are where you're going to see the opportunity. So I think the consulting industry hasn't stopped. And I think it may have paused in some areas, but I think some other areas are heating up. And I think it's actually a great time for consulting because nobody saw this coming. So I think they're going to say, okay, how do we plan to keep going during a crisis? How do we keep our teams working? How do we keep our businesses running? How do we keep things going? And they may be able to, they're needing consulting for that as well. So I kind of see, like, there may be a lot of pausing going on. If you look at hiring, obviously pausing on hiring, things like that. Maybe they're not going to move into the new office that they were going to move into. But as far as servicing their clients, they're going to do everything they can. So some of the nature of the work may have changed a little bit. There may be a pause in some projects, but some clients are saying, listen, I'm planning the next 3 to 5 years. Like, this may slow down a little bit, but we're still doing that big merger with that company. We're still launching those products. We're still doing things. So they have to keep moving. There's only so much pausing they can do. Hopefully that answers the question.
That's great. Dan, I have one final question for you just to honor your time. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing from your experience. This is a two-parter question because people asked two different versions of really the same question. One is, I come from largely entrepreneurial experience, not that kind of like perfect corporate experience that you were talking about before. Yeah. And one is I came from a PhD background, so I'm an advanced degree candidate. What are the skills or experiences that they should be focusing on when networking with or pushing in for their first roles in consulting?
Right. So kind of an earlier point around niching. Something I tell entrepreneurs, like you want to you can't be everything to everybody. You have to figure out what is your brand, if you will. And I think people need to think about what their brand is. If you're an entrepreneur and you've built businesses up, if you're going to say a Deloitte and going to their, working on Fortune 100 or Fortune 50 clients, there may be a challenge there. But I would say if you identify, for an entrepreneur, if you identify practices or firms that have practice areas that focus on growth and innovation, That's compelling for someone with an entrepreneurial mindset who says, I've built companies, I started companies. Ideally, you'd be doing it in the same industry that you were already in. I'd say, so whatever it is you're an entrepreneur in, find the firms that have some innovation side to it in the industry you're in. Make it a path of least resistance is kind of my coaching there.
Amazing.
Don't say, oh, you know what, I've been doing digital marketing and run my own digital marketing business, and now I want to do like IT and supply chain, like there's like, what's the connection point, right? So there's growth areas in a lot of consulting firms, innovation areas, et cetera. Some firms, that's all they do is innovation and stuff like that. So try to find a place that hits your sweet spot in like the industry as well as your experience set from an entrepreneurial standpoint. The entrepreneurial one's a little bit tougher, because it's a harder one to like put a box around, and consultants like things that are, you can put onto like a 2x2 or something like that.
Yes, we do.
That's the thing is that, again, find a firm that has like an innovation mindset. And startups and innovative companies don't like small innovative companies, not large innovative companies. The small companies, they don't have budget for consulting firms, and startups don't have consulting budgets. So where you just find yourself is like companies that like, hey, we help companies innovate, and grow and things like that. And as an entrepreneur, that's what you're doing. So you have to be able to prove you've done it in like a very organized way. The kind of like the way I used to do things by brute force isn't like probably the way a consulting firm is going to do it. So we say like, oh, here's how I thought about the problems. Here's how I broke them down. Here's how I solved the problem and then implemented. And I think that's very compelling, because companies at all sizes sometimes need help cracking the nut on innovation and growth. So the second part was around PhDs. This is actually a PhD is actually a great entry point. Now, assuming the PhD isn't from 15 years ago and you're not doing anything with the PhD, but if you have a technical PhD, there's a lot of firms that have entry points for people with a technical PhD. So say you've had a PhD and you've done postdoc work, or you've done a PhD level job somewhere. Most firms have an entry point for people with PhDs, some kind of technical track that intersects with the generalist consulting track. So for example, Deloitte and LEK both had what was called life science specialist. I forget, I actually can't remember what the Deloitte term was, but LEK, they had a life science specialist. They take someone who's PhD plus postdoc or whatever experience, or med school plus, maybe they'd been a practicing physician or not, sometimes right out of med school or research. And they would go into the life science specialist program. So you had to have a PhD or an M medical degree. That was the requirement. And you spent 2 years as a subject matter expert on life science projects. And you were the person they went to help you figure out the technical parts of the project, speak to physicians, et cetera. And then after 2 years, you were promoted to consultant, which is actually the first job you get out of B school, is the consultant at LEK. So then they'd be a consultant for 2 years and then become an EM. And once they become a consultant, now they're on the consulting track. But those 2 years are used for them to, one, add tons of value as the PhD, but also help them learn consulting. So after the 2 years, they can basically run projects on their own, and they know how to build really good PowerPoint slides and all that kind of stuff, but they still have that science set. So if you are a PhD, like listening to this, based on, what you're doing, if you're in a role that doesn't really lend itself to a kind of consulting kind of work, see if you can get into projects where you are doing project work. Like, we wanted to analyze something, we need to solve something, the executive team wanted help with something, so I joined on this team. Again, side projects, doesn't have to be a full-time job, but I'd say side projects help. So after the course of a year, you do 2 or 3 projects. That gives some meat on the bones. And identify firms that have that PhD track, or and a lot of the career pages will say this. So find a firm that does work in your space that you think might hire PhDs. They're always looking for people like this, because there's just not a lot of people who come out of like strong PhD programs and then want to do consulting work right out of a PhD program. Because up to this point, they've been in school so long, they want to do other things. They don't want to maybe go into consulting or do other stuff. So definitely a track. You just have to make sure you're finding the firm and the practice area, and make sure that your background is calibrated for that. But it's not hard at all. I don't think so. I just think you just got to make sure you're finding the right home for you to be able to do that work. So hopefully that answers that part of the question.
Dan, one final question for you. In 30 seconds or less, what is your top career advice for people who are maybe a couple of years behind where you are at the moment?
Okay, so first thing is understand why you want to be a consultant, why you want to do consulting. Is it because consulting looks glamorous or cool or prestigious? Or is it you really like the idea of, that kind of solving client problems and changing projects every few months, and just that kind of, that is because it's a challenging road. I always tell people, like, think about why you want to do this. Does it make sense for your career? Because if you're not in consulting, you could be building your career somewhere else, right? So you could, in say 5 years, you do 5 years of consulting, 3 years of consulting, you could be building that skill set in industry or somewhere else. So you don't absolutely have to be in consulting. Is it going to help you get to the next rung in the ladder or wherever place you want to be? So first, try to really think deeply around that. Is this the right move for me? Is it the right move now? What am I going to be able to add? What am I going to contribute, right? Because you're going to have to contribute something to these firms. And then how am I going to get some benefit out? And will that get me to where I want to be? So, some people will be doing digital work, and then they go to a consulting firm. There's a name brand in digital consulting. And then they leave that and they go to, I don't know, Google or Facebook or something like that, or a tech firm in more of a strategic product management role. If the answer was, I would never have gotten there without consulting, then that's great. That's why I went to B school. The role I got at GE, I would never have even known about the job unless I went to B school. So answer that question. And then the next thing is, do I have the right skill set? What do I need to do? And if the yes is all across the board to this point, now it's targeting firms where you will be successful getting into. Don't just look at the glossy, fancy names. Just find places where this is something you want to do. Find the firms that do what you want to do. Start building that plan to get in, right? So day one's the job. I would have to have a job offer. You work backwards. I would have to pass through interviews, which means case interviews, which is hiring Jenny and her firm. Getting to interview process, getting to recruiting, getting introduced, networking my way into people who can get me introduced. So follow that process, build that process map out. It's going to take 6 months to a year, but building yourself up, making sure you're doing this for the right reasons, getting the experience set, tailoring your background story so that it fits, and then the networking plan, and then obviously the prep plan. And and my selling piece here for Jenny and her team is, obviously I'm not going to get commission for this call, but you really do not want to underestimate case interviews. They are very weird. They're hard. And I was a biology major in undergrad, and I went through organic chemistry and physics and all this kind of nasty stuff. They're very hard in their own way, and they're very unique. You don't do case interviews anywhere else in your life. So if you're going to do this and you find out you're going to start interviewing, you need to, I prepped for a couple months because I was way out of school at this point. If you're right out of school, these aren't that hard. They are hard. So really, really just have these absolutely nailed. Because if you do not nail these interviews, you're going to have a hard time. So you come in as an experienced hire, maybe this background, I don't know. You crush the case interviews, you have a very good shot of getting it. So that's my final piece there. Make sure it's right for you. Make sure you tailor yourself to fit the experiences that you may need that overlap. Set that plan in motion, identify the firms, and really structure your approach to getting in and be persistent, and you'll get in. I'm not special. Like I said, I don't know board members of consulting firms. My father isn't the CEO of a client. I had no special nepotistic favors. It was just my own diligence and hard work. So anyone can do it. Just make sure it's right for you, and then just go get it.
Amazing. Dan, with that, I will thank you so much for joining us today. And we appreciate you, Dan. We appreciate the journey that you've been through. And we're so grateful for the wisdom that you shared today. Thanks again.
Hey, no problem. And thank you so much, Jane, for having me on. You guys do great work, and I would not be where I am without you guys. So thanks again, and always happy to help, and hope all you have a great day, and stay safe, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to this podcast. Strategy Simplified is about making strategy and strategy roles more accessible to you. Find more at managementconsulted.com or email us, team@managementconsulted.com. In addition, if you would like or love this podcast, we would love to hear from you. If you've got feedback on it, please send it. And if you have an idea for a great future guest, we would love to hear about it. Thanks again for joining.